Hi, welcome back to my channel. So I have used YouTube in the past as kind of a therapeutic cleansing to talk about my life. And I feel like I really want to be open and honest with my viewers and my fan base with kind of like who I really am as a person and where I came from and what I've been through. So this video is about how I was once homeless. So in order to tell you this story, I kind of have to go back and give you some backstory. I was a very troubled youth growing up. I started experimenting with alcohol and smoking at a very young age. And my mom, God bless her, was a single mom. So she worked as a nurse and she had to be at work all the time, so I was stuck at home with my brother and I kind of got into the wrong crowd. So the first time that I got kicked out of the house was at 11 years old. It was Canada Day weekend and I went out with a bunch of friends and I didn't come home. I ended up falling asleep at my friend's house and I didn't come home that night. So my mom had it and she shipped me off to live with my estranged adoptive father, who I had no relationship with. So I lived with him for about 9 months. It was a very awkward time for me. I felt like I was imposing on him and his family. I had to share a room with my stepsister. There was a lot of Tupac involved. I wasn't happy. I lived there for 8 or 9 months and I got in trouble at school all the time. I brought my friends home from school on a lunch break and got them drunk and got expelled. I was getting in fights and getting expelled. Finally, my 11-year-old brain thought, I'm gonna run away. I hopped on a Greyhound bus and I ran away back to my hometown, hoping that my mother would take me back in, which she did. And when I came back here, it was a lot of drinking OEs at the skate park and freestyle rap battles and smoking cigarettes, and it just kind of continued to be that troubled youth story. The second time I got kicked out of the house was at 13, but it was only for a few days and I just went to my grandmother's until everyone kind of settled down and then I came back home. The third time I got kicked out, I was going through a traumatic experience, so I took off from home and I didn't tell anyone where I was and I was gone for 3 days. I won't really get into what happened during that time, but when I came home, my mother again had it and she kicked me out again. My only option at this point was to live in a homeless shelter / women's shelter. So at 16 years old, I'm having to drop out of high school. I lived in a women's shelter and I had to work a full-time job cleaning hotel rooms. This is actually a very fond memory for me, even though it's kind of a traumatic experience and I don't think that any person at that age should have to experience this, but living in that homeless shelter was quite interesting because I lived amongst drug addicts, prostitutes, and the mentally ill. I had a small cot and I shared a room with a crack addict. I don't remember her name, but she was very nice and she was a good roommate. A few of the people in the house I remember, there was a girl named Deanna and she had schizophrenia, which was really interesting talking to her and asking her what it was like to be schizophrenic and kind of learning about mental illness. A few of the other girls were prostitutes and that was really interesting to kind of see the behind the scenes story of these humans that you pass every day on the street and you don't really know why they're there or how they got there or what their life is actually like. So at this homeless shelter, I slept in my cot and I woke up every morning and I made my little lunch and I would take the bus and I would go clean hotel rooms for 6 to 8 hours and then come back to the shelter and have dinner and watch American Idol with my very strange little family. It was a family setting. All of these different characters from different walks of life just trying to get through it. They were my family. And at 16 years old, this is a very strange thing. Looking back on it, it's a very strange thing to have to do and go through. So I lived there for a few months and I saved up every paycheck and I really wanted to get my own place and I saved and I saved and I saved and I finally had enough money to get my own place. Keep in mind that through all of this, I had dropped out of school, I was working, and I was trying to get my GED through correspondence. So I finally saved up enough money to get my own place. I was getting ready to move. Everything was planned. During this fiasco, this woman that was in the room next to me, I became very good friends with her. We would smoke together, we would have our coffees together, and I went into her room one morning because she owed me a cigarette, and I found her body. She had passed away in her sleep. Her life was very interesting to me. She had been a big-time lawyer in Toronto, and she developed a meth addiction and ended up in the shelter with me, the 16-year-old bad kid. But I'm not really sure how she died, but I found her body laying there, and it was very traumatic. So I had to go get, obviously, one of the workers to call an ambulance and get that sorted. But in the midst of all this, I had a place to move into, and I was getting ready to go, and I had this tiny bachelor suite which fit my bed and a TV. It was the size of a closet. But I was so happy to be out of that situation, even though it brought me so much enlightenment, I guess, on how that side of the spectrum is. And the funny thing is now, that tiny little bachelor suite that I got, my first ever place, is right across the street from my condo now that I bought 2 years ago. So every morning when I leave my house, I go out the front of my entryway into the street, and I can look up and see that part of my life. I don't think that any child should have to go through that kind of traumatic experience, and I would hate for my daughter to have nowhere to sleep at night and have to live in a cot. But that is my story about how I was homeless. I eventually graduated from high school. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next week.